Hello and welcome. We're about to tackle one of the most absolutely mind-bending questions you can possibly ask. Is our reality, everything you see, everything you feel, everything you are, is it all just a ridiculously advanced computer simulation? It's an idea that seriously blurs the line between science fiction and some pretty heavy academic thought. All right, let's dive right in.
So let's just get straight to it. Seriously, look around you right now. The room you're in, the device you're watching this on, heck, even your own memories and thoughts. The simulation hypothesis suggests that all of this might just be the output of an unbelievably powerful computer program.
And this quote just sets the stage perfectly, doesn't it? This isn't just about whether the universe is real in the way we usually think about it. No, this goes way deeper. It questions the very foundation of what we call existence. So, where did this modern, almost scientific-sounding version of a super old philosophical puzzle even come from?
Well, the whole conversation really got supercharged back in 2003 by a philosopher named Nick Bostrom. Now get this, he didn't even try to prove we're in a simulation. Instead, he laid out this brilliant logical argument called a trilemma, which basically says one of three very, very strange possibilities has to be true.
Okay, before we get to the trilemma itself, we have to wrap our heads around this key concept, an ancestor simulation. The idea is actually pretty simple. If a civilization gets advanced enough, it's not a huge leap to think they might want to run super detailed simulations of their own past, people like us, to figure out their own history.
Okay, so here's the crucial part. Bostrom argues that at least one of these statements has to be the right one. Option 1, humanity and any civilization like us is pretty much doomed. We go extinct before we ever get the chance to create these simulations. Option 2, we survive, but for whatever reason, we just completely lose interest in creating them. But, and this is the big one, if both of those are false, if civilizations do survive and they do run these simulations, then there would be billions, maybe trillions of simulated minds for every single original biological mind.
And that's where this slide comes in. It just perfectly visualizes that last point. If just one base reality civilization creates thousands of these ancestor simulations, the number of simulated people would just astronomically outweigh the original ones. So just playing the odds, statistically speaking, it would be overwhelmingly likely that you and me are in one of the many simulations, not the one original reality. Wild, right?
So, we've got the logic down, but what makes some thinkers suspect this is more than just a fun philosophical game? Are there any clues, any little glitches in the matrix that might hint at a computational reality?
Well, supporters point to a few really intriguing things. First, just look at our own technology. The realism of video games and virtual reality is just exploding. It seems totally plausible that some future civilization could create simulations that are completely indistinguishable from what we call real life. Second, physics itself is a little, digital. When you get down to the tiniest scales, reality isn't smooth and continuous. It's broken up into these tiny, indivisible units, almost like pixels on a screen. Could that be the resolution of our universe? And finally, there's this idea that consciousness might be like software. It doesn't necessarily need a squishy biological brain to run. It could, in theory, operate on any computer that's powerful enough.
Okay, that all sounds pretty compelling, I'll admit. But let's pump the brakes for a second. The huge majority of scientists and philosophers are, let's just say, deeply skeptical. So let's flip the coin and see how this argument holds up against some really big objections.
And this slide really lays out the core tension perfectly. On one side, you have this really neat, clean, logical argument. But on the other side, you have this giant wall of skepticism that's built on some very real, practical, and philosophical problems. The whole idea is based on pure speculation. The computing power needed seems totally impossible, and it just faces these huge philosophical hurdles. It's a classic showdown between compelling logic and a whole lot of practical objections.
Let's break these down. First off, Bostrom's entire argument hangs on what some future civilization might do, which is, let's be honest, pure guesswork. Second, the energy and raw computing power to simulate our entire universe down to the last quantum particle, that could be just astronomically, physically impossible to pull off. Third, there's the moral question. Would a truly advanced ethical civilization really create simulated worlds packed with conscious beings who can feel pain and suffering? And finally, the really big one. If a simulation is perfect, its creators could easily hide any and all evidence that it even exists.
And that brings us to a gigantic problem for the simulation hypothesis. See, a core principle of science is something called falsifiability. It just means that for an idea to be scientific, there has to be some conceivable way to prove it wrong. For instance, if my theory is all swans are white, you can prove me wrong by just finding one black swan. Easy. But if the simulation is perfect, how could you ever find evidence to disprove it? You couldn't. And that kind of pushes the idea out of the realm of science and into pure philosophy, or what some call metaphysics.
So if we can't really prove it or disprove it, why are we even talking about this? Well, because whether it's true or not, just wrestling with the idea forces us to face some of the deepest questions about who we are and what our place in the cosmos is.
This is usually the very first place people's minds go. If our reality is programmed, does that cheapen our choices, our loves, our struggles? Or could we find meaning precisely in playing the game and living our simulated lives to the absolute fullest?
The implications here are just profound. The laws of physics wouldn't be these fundamental truths of all existence, they'd just be the governing rules of the program. The very definition of real would shift entirely, and it would raise these enormous ethical questions about our creators and, well, our own moral status as created beings.
And this is where the whole question gets turned right back on us. As we get closer and closer to creating truly intelligent artificial consciousness and these huge virtual worlds, this stops being just an abstract thought experiment. It actually becomes a really pressing ethical roadmap for our own future. What kind of responsibilities will we have if, one day, we become the simulators?
You know, in the end, the simulation hypothesis might just be the ultimate intellectual puzzle. It challenges every assumption we have about reality and forces us to be humble about what we think we know. It's a powerful reminder that the greatest mysteries might not be out there among the stars, but right here, in the very nature of our own existence.